The cranial capacity of the hominin lineage expanded significantly between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens. This physical growth coincided with the emergence of symbolic thought, long-range planning, and cumulative tool culture. Evolutionary biology relies on three models: the social brain, ecological foraging, and sexual selection hypotheses, yet they leave a mechanical gap. For sustained abstract thought, the prefrontal cortex must be released from the biological drive to reproduce, temporarily allocating resources elsewhere. Evolutionary theorist Andrés Sebastián Pirolo proposes a mechanism to fill this gap, called the dual feedback hypothesis. This framework relies on a strict operational definition of sexual fantasy, the mental simulation of an absent partner that results in physiological arousal and partial biological satisfaction. The core claim is that the specific act of mental simulation and the capacity for complex abstract reasoning are structurally identical processes. The neurological routine required to run a simulation of a mate without physical stimuli is the exact substrate required to decouple thought from immediate instinct. Pirolo's proposal suggests that humanity's capacity for abstraction may have begun here, in the simulated satisfaction of our strongest biological drive. Cognitive scientists refer to the mental representation of an absent object or event in working memory as perspection. This logic tree shows the 4 mandatory neural steps for perspection. Whether planning a tool or imagining a mate, early humans executed this sequence in the default mode network. First, the brain severs representation from sensory input, creating an isolated mental workspace. Second, it maintains a stable internal model of an object, even though the physical referent is missing. Third, the brain assigns an emotional valuation or specific biological markers to that simulated scenario. Finally, the internal simulation directs the body to modulate its behavior, delaying immediate action in favor of a new, internally generated plan. A hominin visualizing a hand ox before striking the flint, and a hominin visualizing a desired partner are running the exact same computational software. This diagram shows Loop A, the internal cycle where simulation impacts biological drives. As the hominin neocortex initially expanded, it granted early humans a rudimentary capacity for internal simulation. This simulation enabled sexual fantasy, providing a functional substitute that yielded partial satisfaction without requiring a physical partner. Attaining this partial satisfaction directly dampens the constant, high-alert state of direct reproductive competition. The individual is no longer in permanent need of a mate for relief. Lowering that urgency liberates prefrontal attentional resources. Energy previously consumed by mate-seeking behavior can now be redirected toward non-reproductive abstraction, like ecological planning or refining tool designs. Better abstraction yields evolutionary advantages, driving further brain expansion, which increases the capacity for simulation. While Loop A changes the internal brain state, Loop B maps the external behavioral consequences of that newfound autonomy. Sexual autonomy lowers an individual's minimum reproductive threshold. An agent capable of self-satisfaction can function normally without immediate mating access. Freedom from urgency creates genuine mate selectivity. The individual can pause, evaluate options, and wait for a superior partner rather than pursuing the nearest one. Higher selectivity forces an arms race in courtship. To be chosen by a selective partner requires complex signaling, assessment, deception, and counter-deception. Navigating this intricate courtship protocol requires a sophisticated level of emotional intelligence and theory of mind. Superior social cognition makes an individual more successful at navigating complex alliances, which reinforces their social standing and further expands their sexual autonomy. Achieving biological autonomy from immediate sexual tension minted the cognitive free time necessary for human intellectual development. The physical ability to decline an immediate urge structurally forced hominins to become socially intelligent. We must determine if this capacity for autonomy exists in nature independent of hominin evolution, or if it requires a fully modern human brain. This phylogenetic tree shows that non-reproductive sexual behavior is ancient, predating the divergence of haplorhines and strepsirrhines by roughly 40 million years. Historically, evolutionary biology interpreted these behaviors almost exclusively in males, categorizing them as a mechanism for post-copulatory sperm selection, while ignoring non-reproductive sexual behavior in females. Empirical data from female bonobos directly challenges the logic of earlier, male-centric models. Among bonobos, the highest-ranking females, those who navigate the most intense cognitive demands and complex alliance networks engage in the highest rates of non-reproductive sexual behavior. While chimpanzees typically resolve competitive tension through aggression, bonobos resolve inter-individual tension sexually. The cognitive demands of this sexual negotiation are extensive. Evidence from orangutans demonstrates another critical link. Female orangutans have been documented fashioning plant material into tools, explicitly for self-gratification. This provides a direct physical link between tool use cognition and sexual autonomy. Across diverse primate species, social complexity, tool use, and sexual autonomy empirically co-vary, providing the living evidence for the dual feedback hypothesis. The dual feedback hypothesis operates as a unified system. Loop A produces the raw cognitive substrate through internal simulation, while Loop B channels that power into sophisticated social complexity. A cognitively complex animal might simply have more imagination for self-stimulation, meaning cognition could have preceded sexual fantasy. The causal direction is less important than the lock. Once co-present, imagination and sexual autonomy amplify each other in an unbreakable feedback loop. This structural equivalence generates explicit, falsifiable predictions that can be tested with modern neuroscience. This fMRI projection illustrates the hypothese's prediction. Scans of humans engaged in sexual fantasy will show a specific, stronger neural overlap with regions of the default mode network associated with prospective planning, rather than activating isolated reward centers alone. Clinically, it predicts that damage to prefrontal regions associated with abstract perspection should correspondingly impair an individual's capacity for sexual fantasy. Evolutionary biology has spent decades searching for the environmental pressure that released the human prefrontal cortex from the demands of immediate survival. The mechanism of release may be entirely internal. The first evolutionary domain where mental simulation proved adaptive was likely the domain where it was most immediately pleasurable. Before hominins used their minds to invent cumulative culture, construct shelters, or plan for the future, their first exercise in abstract imagination was the simulated mate.